Monsieur Ruis-Pickasso, I'm extremely glad to greet you here and to express from a part of our museum our gratitude for your exceptional generosity to this project, to our institution, your generosity that made possible this gorgeous exhibition. I envy the people who would come and see at last the complicated and rich story of Pablo and Olga. And you're the direct heir of them. What I wanted to ask is that there is a certain trend now in the world in regard to Picasso, to see him not as an artist only, but as a person, as a man, and to create projects that take very many small ephemera, like tickets, like small documents, like pieces of personal story, and telling, for example, the story of year 1932, or the story of his relations with Olga, taking this human dimension into special account. What's your opinion? Is it a perspective way?
Yes, it is. I think, first of all, I thank you for the kind word, but this exhibition could not have been put together without your vision also, and the beauty of the show. It's also due to that very good collaboration we had all together with Musée Picasso Paris and my foundation. So also me, I want to thank you, and to thank you all the people who have worked on the exhibition. My point of view, answering to your question, my point of view is that we are in a way lucky to be in this 21st century, and we have more distance from 20th century. So research and scholars can study with a wider perspective,
Yes.
20th century with much more information, documents, data, and this give the opportunity to look at Picasso creation, but also the context in which he was living, and the birth of 20th century modernity. So I believe what we are able to discover now, and which was not the case when Picasso died, for example, in 1973, people didn't know how many works he had created in his life. Nobody knew exactly the density or the depths of the magnitude of his art, due to all the interconnection one artworks has with other artworks in his career. So we've been able, maybe in the last 10-15 years, in this 21st century, with the artistic community, to really study what Picasso did, which is not only a great achievement in artistic development and modernity, but also in the way Picasso, as also Marcel Duchamp, for example, mentioned it in his famous text, The Creative Art,
Yes.
Creative Act, I think. Yes. That's the text. He says that Picasso just left for us his own life, his journal, his diary. Each of his work is one of his thoughts, and so we can give not only one or two or three interpretations of each of his work, but as you mentioned before, we are able to include certain works in maybe 30, 40 different concepts, different subjects. It's like each work is like a big book in which each pages are a kind of a different definition or interpretation, which means Picasso was quite bright and intelligent, but that we all know that Picasso was very, very intelligent. But he put art really in modernity by achieving this very modern movement of giving to us what he was feeling. And Marcel Duchamp was saying in this creative art that the importance of the artist himself, what he thinks, what he believes, the subject he depicts, and what there is inside the subject of his art piece, and also us, you and I, how we perceive all that combination, and at the end that as a viewer, we are the person, we are the people who can give our own interpretation due to our own inside thoughts and personality. So yes, 20th century gave us that opportunity to study and to achieve a better understanding of what was the aim of all those artists who were very revolutionary in the early 20th century and all along the 20th century.
Yes, we are so coming to a more historical attitude to the great persons of 20th century art, and maybe we can thank Picasso for not throwing away anything, for keeping all these small tickets, small invoices, small ephemera of his life. And Olga did the same. She didn't throw away anything. She kept the story. And coming to her and to the women in life of Picasso, it's a common story to tell and to regard Picasso through the women he lived with, and through the lives, these small lives that followed one another. Olga is the most important woman in Picasso's life, without any doubt. What do you think about this attitude, and is it fruitful, or does it make some boundaries in regard to Picasso's creative activity and creative freedom?
I think it's make both, because very often with Picasso, he can be perceived the way he was living. Even as you mentioned, he had different sentimental life with many, maybe not many, but quite many different wives or spouse he lived with. At the end, he was living in a very classical way, artistic classical way, because he will be at home. The studio will be very often at home, and he will have a family, a wife, children, and he will dedicate most of his time being with his family, his friend, and the rest of the time working hard and working non-stop. And as you mentioned, all the documents, all the archive are the proof of what I was mentioning earlier, that Picasso did depict and create what was happening in his life on a daily basis. So I think Olga is a very crucial moment in Picasso life, because it's when Picasso decided to change and to challenge himself after Cubism, and I do believe that what Picasso left to us is a great legacy, in which what you were saying, it's exact, but also the way he continued to assist and to help every single person he lived with, because he left Olga, but he never abandoned her. He has been caring for Olga, even if he mostly destroyed her by leaving her alone. But what you were saying, it's exact.
Well, and that's also a common place to say that Picasso destroyed the people around him. What do you think of it?
I don't think so. I don't think so. I think very wise and intelligent people are very often not very easy, because they can give you 1 chance, 2 chances, 3 chances, yes. 4 chances. But at a certain point, bad energy, it's like poison, it's like a disease. Exactly. So for great artists, or also for people who do things in life, which can be also the good carpenter or even the good mechanics in a garage, if he only stay with people who bother him and who make his daily life complicated, yes. he will say no. He will say no. So Picasso had this image of a kind of monster, but the women who chose to live with Picasso were free. Yes, they were not. Me personally, and I'm not in the position of being one Picasso wife. But if you come and met Picasso, and if you're reasonable, you should say, well, he's a fantastic person, he's maybe even a genius and a rare person in a century who really creates something very new, and I will not decide to live with such a guy, because I'm sure every women who live with Picasso were able to depict or understand the danger of living with such a man. I think Picasso never really lied about who he was, what he was doing, and the purpose of his life was to continue creating art. Yes. And so I think this is an important fact that we don't talk about very often, but Picasso was Picasso, and the women who accepted deliberately to live with Picasso engage themselves in a very complex and difficult journey, because if you're a little bit wise, you can see that maybe you can burn yourself living with an artist. And Picasso, it's not the only case. You can look at great scientists, great writer, artists, politicians, businessmen. When they are very strong, for the family around, it's a little bit complicated. But what Picasso did, it's so important for us, for all the people who love art, and we know we need art to exist. Without art, we're not existing. We need a society, and we need art to continue developing our desire of being. And so Picasso did that very efficiently. He did these things very efficiently. So I believe Picasso was totally a free man who never really forced anyone to be close to him. But he would, at a certain point, denied or pushed away people who were not good for him, which I was saying earlier. I think artists want to stay more in the positive side of life, which is not always possible because life function on life terms. It's not very easy. But let's say that Picasso was a friend, and many Picasso's friends declared and say who he was. And so he was not only very generous, but he was friendship was very important, and his commitment, what he believed, was very, very strong. And so most of the people who met Picasso confirm his strength in believing in human relation, in friendship, and in positive attitude.
Absolutely. I believe he was a very frank, open person. What was the secret? What was the mystery of Picasso then, if he was so frank and open?
Well, I think, I'm not sure because I'm not in that position, but I think when you met or you are close to a great master, artist, or great character, they have this kind of energy which slowly makes them able to know wisely who are the people with whom they are working, or whom they encounter or meet, and so they have this very strange, because we can't really define it rationally, but this ability of knowing a little bit who we are. So when he met someone, he will say, well, I will try to help him, or I will convince him that what he wants to do, he should do it, even if he's afraid to do such a thing. And so many comments made by famous people say that Picasso was always pushing them in doing the things they were wishing so much to do. And as we know, every day when we want to achieve something, sometimes we hesitate, sometimes we are frightened, we ask friends, should I do this, should I not do it? And so as far as I remember, Picasso always was very interested by people and curious, and so he would always be very positive.
And he was a magnetic person, wasn't he?
Very, yes. You can see on the photos of his eyes, and those dark eyes, and he had this ability of really perceiving. Well, he's one of his kind, and there are not many Picasso on art history. So he really joined the most important artists in our art history. Also, he was able to be very difficult as a human being, because he remained a human being. So sometimes it's not the good day to be close, and he had yes, certain person get wounded. Exactly as Olga, and also in some way my father, saying it was a fairy tale. No, we are not in a fairy tale kind of. No, I'm not making comments that Picasso was living in a dream, and no. Not at all. some of the tragedy of the 20th century make us able to see how life has been sometimes difficult. And Picasso also was not always in a good mood, but yeah, some of the people suffered from him, but most of the people really get a plus, get something which really sometimes even change their life a little bit.
Oh yes, and well, we are coming closer to your personal story, to the history of your family, and as Picasso was a magnetic person, the same is Russian culture, and now they get together with the help of this exhibition and with the help of the figure of Olga. And what I wanted to ask is, what do you think, and maybe what do you remember from this personal, intimate line tying together Picasso and Russian culture?
I think both cultures have something in common, which is the land is rich, but it's also the climate, the rudeness of the soil. It's not always so rich. It's not Italy. We are not in Italy, which also we can compare with the artistic development of Italian art. So Spain has in common this deep sense of poetic vision, this kind of passion for existing and life, and also this kind of very, very unknown reason why depression and stress and anxiety and both almost at the same intensity level. So unfortunately, I'm not coming to Russia very, very often, but in the last 30 or 40 years, I've been coming a few times, and so I can really relate with what is in the spirit, in a way, of Spain and in Russia, because of the soil, of the yes, it's not easy to make grow things in the soil in Russia due to the weather condition. In Spain, you have a lot of rocks, and then it's a little bit the same, and the population believe in things which are not always totally rational, which makes them more closer to this kind of poetic sense of life. And so I think Picasso and Olga met on those bases, that Picasso would not really try to convince a Spanish lady to live with him, but this Russian lady who was in this very modern movement of new dance and new music interest him a lot, and I think it's why they were able to share a moment in their life together, because this part of feelings they both have from their maybe from the time they were born helps them to get together and to stay together.
Well, that's true, and that's very Russian and very Spanish as well. Oh, well, and do you know if Picasso kept any Russian traditions, some traces of being together with Olga in his personal life after she left his life?
Well, in Picasso daily life, I will not say I remember something. Picasso passed away. I was 14 years old, so I was quite young, and he was living with another wife.
Yes.
It's also something I want to mention is that Picasso and Olga had this very relevant life together, and after, most of the time Olga was defined not as a good person. But I have my opinion on that, and my opinion is that obviously when a man leaves a woman, when he lives with a different one, and again, at dinner time, he will not mention his previous wife. It's better to spend a good dinner in your new family if you not say very good things only of your previous wife. Yes. That's a very simple fact.
Sure, yes.
So I think also the bad Olga image is due to when you live with different women, you don't talk of the previous one, because this is not a good way to go if you want peace at home. So this is one of my opinion about it. But to answer to your question, what I have as remember of Russian things, it's not of Picasso, it's about my father Paul, who was, for example, before each journey or each travel require of all the family members to sit in the living room and to stay quiet for 1 minute, or sometime he will imitate Olga, his mother, dancing, which was quite funny for my father, he was quite tall and not very thin, so it was quite funny. But my father had totally this double personality, as we mentioned before, between in this kind of Russian way of being and Spanish way. And my mother, Christine, who also is very important in all this adventure of discovering, because she kept the trunk, Olga trunk, and she always told me, well, Bernard, one day you will have to go into making the inventory of that Olga trunk. But my mother said that Paul was painted in one Arlecchino costume, and that this painting for her represents very well who was my father Paul, with his multiple personalities, like many different personalities, because it's how can be a Spaniard or eventually a Russian person with different mood, different attitude. And so I've been able to see in my father Paul sometimes great excitement and sometimes great depression and love and passion, and something which I think Spanish people and Russian people can identify with.
Yes, and we're so naturally coming to the figure of your father, which is represented in our exhibition as a child, as a newborn child and a growing child, with all that masks offered him by Picasso, mask of Arlequin, Pierrot, Maréchal de France, and Toreador, and what was his true face, and was it really appreciated by his father, Pablo Picasso?
Mm-hmm. Yes, it was. He has been very, very close to his father, and it's maybe also one of the part of the drama that my father Paul chose after Second World War, because they were separated during the war, because my father did escape from France, crossing the Rhine, swimming to go to Switzerland, because he was not young enough, but he had the age to do his military service, and he didn't like in 1940 to do his military service, so he escaped, and he remained in Switzerland until 1945. But after 1945, and maybe also before Second World War, already he chose to stay closer to his father than to the mother Olga, which for Olga was really sad. So my father Paul remained very close to his father, to Picasso. In my youth, my father would not mention very often Olga, which for me Olga was a kind of mystery and part of what we can see now on display in this exhibition. It's also the result of my desire to know where I'm coming from, what are my origin, what I'm belonging to, and well, this doesn't make me a big. In French, we say a big head. Like you know, I don't feel any more special because of that. I'm me, and I continue to be me. But yes, my father will be closer to Picasso. Will also he will do many tasks for his father, and they had a very close relationship, Picasso and Paul.
Yes, I hope maybe one day would make an exhibition on that. Why not? As this one about Olga. And maybe one of the last things I wanted to ask you, and I'm fascinated with, the very process of unveiling this personal family story, treasured in Boigelou, the manor Pablo and Olga bought together and Olga lived in. You told me about this constant process of discovery new family relics, and here in this exhibition we have this trunk as a symbol of these discoveries. Could you tell more about the mystery of Boigelou and this process which is still continued?
Yeah, well, yes, Boigelou continue, and we are even now with my dear wife making exhibition and trying to open to the public Boigelou, and inviting contemporary artists to do shows there. So the house we kept it, and we try to open it more to the public. But that place I went very more than often when I was a young child, and in my youth also, and I continue to go now. And so this house was a big manor in which I was a little bit scared, as many children are at night in places where you hear sound and so that trunk was there, and in a room where nobody would go really, and so sometime during the day I would go to frighten myself, and one day I decided, after my mother keep saying, well, Bernard, you will have to do that, and so I did open that trunk, and in our foundation for almost 10 years we've been making the inventory of that, and then then slowly we decide, not slowly, but we decide that it would be important to do an exhibition, and we ask Joachim Pissarro, which is one of the curator of the exhibition, to work with us and to look at all those inventory and archives we found, because before we translated also thousands of letters received by Olga family in France, and all that allowed me to discover who was Olga family, because I had no idea exactly of what was doing Olga's sisters, if she had brothers, etc., etc. So I've been discovering all my Russian families through what I discovered in that trunk, and it took many years before trying to put together a project. Which eventually we did, and to them. So yeah, I'm so proud and happy that the exhibition is here. But for example, there is a painting, because we were also in a more academic or scholar way. We were trying with Joachim Pissarro, who also is a great grandson of a famous impressionist painter, Pissarro. We were trying to find how much Picasso was related in his art, fact of his daily life. And here in this exhibition you have a perfect example of that, of Paul making a drawing on the table. It's a very magnificent and beautiful drawing of a child, which is my father Paul. And in the painting, if you look at it, you will see a kind of bird. And it seems to be, can be seen as a swan. And in one of the letter received by Olga, Oleg, his cousin, say in the letter, it said, yes, you will find enclosed a drawing of a swan. Oleg did for you, Paul, and so we had this kind of proof of how Picasso was modern and how Picasso would depict his life, because when Olga, well, I made a mistake, so we will do it again. So we will cut. So with Joachim Pissarro, we were wishing to find a proof of that Picasso was making in his paintings, when he was painting, a statement of his daily life, what was happening in his daily life. And so he painted this very marvelous painting of Paul drawing on a table, and you can vaguely see a swan. And so Olga, we suppose, asked Paul to make a drawing for his cousin Oleg in Russia, to enclose the drawing with a letter. And so Paul did this swan, and that letter was sent to Oleg. And we have a letter in which Oleg say, "Thank you, give my thanks to my cousin Paul, who sent me this beautiful drawing of a swan, and I want to thank him." So we had the proof that Picasso also was commenting his own life. Yes. So that was something very important for us as a discovery, and and we did continue after to make research besides the trunk in Ruis-Picasso Paris archive, and also here in the beautiful archive you have in the Pushkin Museum. So it's a great achievement which we hope we can develop more in investigating in those crucial creative time in the first part of 20th century.
Oh, yes, and well, as in the process of coming to the beginning of our conversation with the importance of everyday life and everyday objects for Picasso's life, and this exhibition brings together all these layers, all these torn pieces of family history, and this process is continuing, and this is what seems the most important thing to me as history of art, history of society, history of personal life of the artist. They are all brought together, and this spirit of discovery is embodied by, for example, your foundation, the FABA, and I believe this is not the last project of our two institutions. So may I thank you for this one, and express my feeling of the wish to work together in the future.
Thank you.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.